Death wears a white cloak in the Himalayas. But up here, they whispered of another predator, one that left footprints too large for any known beast, and whose roar echoed like cracking glaciers, the Yeti. I wasn't just joining an expedition to find a myth, I was chasing a chilling possibility that the agency's interest in this abominable entity was far more sinister than mere scientific curiosity. On the roof of the world, where the air thins and sanity frays, my hunt for truth risked unearthing a horror far colder than any blizzard. Death wears a white cloak in the Himalayas, a shroud of ice and unforgiving wind. But up here, amongst the prayer flags fluttering like trapped souls in the thin, biting air of Kathmandu, the whispers spoke of another predator. One that left footprints too large for any known beast, whose guttural roar was said to echo like cracking glaciers, and whose very existence was an affront to the ordered world, the Yeti. I wasn't here just for the dubious honor of joining another expedition chasing a myth. I was here because the whispers of the agency's clandestine interests often led to the world's most desolate and dangerous frontiers. The invitation had been discreet, delivered through a chain of intermediaries that reeked of careful vetting and hushed importance. Professor Alistair Finch, a renowned cryptozoologist with more tenacity than funding, was leading a privately sponsored expedition into the remote Khumbu region, the traditional hunting ground of Yeti lore. His proposal was couched in scientific ambition, a quest for irrefutable proof. My acceptance, however, was predicated on a chilling possibility that the agency's documented interest in anomalous extremophiles might extend to a creature capable of thriving in this brutal high-altitude wilderness. Their definition of study rarely aligned with ethical scientific pursuit. The pre-expedition briefing was held in a cramped, incense-filled room overlooking the chaotic vibrancy of Thamel. Finch, a wiry man with an unruly shock of gray hair and eyes that burned with an almost fanatical conviction, laid out the plan. Beside him sat Tenzin Sherpa, our head guide, a man whose face was a roadmap of mountain winds and stoic endurance. His presence was reassuring. The Sherpas were the true kings of these mountains. The rest of the team was a mixed bag. A couple of eager doctoral students, a hardened mountaineer named Gregor who seemed more interested in bagging peaks than cryptids, and a quiet, observant woman, Dr. Lena Hansen, listed as the expedition's medic and biologist, whose credentials felt a little too polished, a little too agency. I made a mental note to watch her closely. Tadakol Twaldly. Finch spoke of recent, compelling eyewitness accounts of new satellite imagery showing anomalous heat signatures in unexplored valleys. He displayed casts of enormous, vaguely hominid footprints, their origins debated and dismissed by mainstream science for decades. "The evidence is mounting, Mr. Ryder," he'd said, his gaze intense. "This time, we bring back more than just stories." My role was officially security and logistics consultant, a vague enough title to grant me access without raising too many eyebrows. The agency had, in its own twisted way, equipped me with a unique skill set for surviving and operating in hostile environments, both natural and man-made. Here, the hostility was elemental: sub-zero temperatures, treacherous ice falls, the ever-present threat of altitude sickness that could turn your brain to mush, and of course, the elusive quarry itself. We spent days acclimatizing, the air thinning with every upward trek, each breath a conscious effort. The grandeur of the Himalayas was undeniable, a breathtaking panorama of snow-capped giants piercing a sky of impossible blue. But beneath the beauty lay a profound indifference to human life. This was a realm where one misstep, one lapse in judgment, could mean a swift, frozen end. During one acclimatization hike, Tenzin, usually a man of few words, paused, looking towards a distant shadowed ridge. "Mete," he murmured, his voice low, using the Sherpa term for the Yeti. "He watches, he knows." There was no fear in his voice, only a deep, almost reverent respect. The stories proliferated. Tales of yaks found dismembered, of strange whistling calls in the dead of night, of Sherpas who had glimpsed a hulking, furred figure moving with impossible speed across sheer ice walls. Folklore, perhaps, but in this place where the boundary between the known and the unknown was as thin as the air itself, even folklore had teeth. My hunt for truth, and for the agency's chilling purpose on the roof of the world, risked unearthing a horror far colder than any blizzard. The thin air already felt heavy with unseen watchers. The true ascent began under a sky of polished steel, the air so thin it felt like breathing powdered glass. Each step was a victory against the crushing altitude and the burning in my lungs. The sheer scale of the Himalayas was humbling, reducing our small, determined party to insignificant specks against a backdrop of colossal, snow-draped peaks. My initial acclimatization had helped, but the higher we climbed, the more the mountain asserted its dominance. Headaches were a constant companion, a dull throb behind the eyes, and every exertion left me gasping. Professor Finch, despite his age, pushed forward with a relentless, almost feverish energy, his eyes scanning every ridge and snowfield. Dr. Hansen, the biologist, maintained a professional, detached calm, her observations meticulous, though I couldn't shake the feeling she was cataloging more than just the flora and fauna. Gregor, the mountaineer, moved with an arrogant efficiency, clearly in his element, yet seemingly dismissive of the expedition's primary goal. The doctoral students, initially brimming with excitement, were now more subdued, their faces etched with the strain of the climb. It was on the third day above the tree line, traversing a vast, wind-scoured snowfield, that Tenzin Sherpa suddenly stopped, raising a hand. He pointed. There, imprinted in the otherwise pristine blanket of white, were tracks. They were enormous, far larger than any bear or wolf. Each print was deep, almost perfectly preserved in the compacted snow, showing 5 broad, splayed toes and a distinct, almost human-like heel. They were fresh, no more than a few hours old, the edges still sharp despite the biting wind. A palpable thrill, mixed with a cold knot of apprehension, ran through the group. "Mete," Tenzin breathed, his voice barely a whisper, his usual stoicism tinged with something akin to awe. Finch was ecstatic, scrambling forward with his camera and measuring tape, his earlier fatigue forgotten. "Incredible! Absolutely incredible! Look at the stride, the depth! This is no bear, gentlemen, no bear!" Even Gregor looked momentarily impressed, though he quickly masked it with a gruff comment about snowdrift distortion. Dr. Hansen knelt, her gloved fingers gently tracing the outline of one massive print, her expression unreadable. I watched her carefully. Her reaction was too controlled, too clinical. The tracks led upwards, towards a forbidding jumble of icefalls and seracs, a treacherous, unstable region. They appeared with an almost deliberate clarity for several hundred meters, then, inexplicably, vanished. One moment they were there, deep and defined. The next, nothing but undisturbed snow, as if their creator had simply taken flight or dissolved into the biting wind. It was deeply unsettling. That night, camped precariously on a narrow ledge, the wind howling like a banshee through the surrounding peaks, we heard it. A sound unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the roar of an animal, nor the whistle of the wind through rock crevasses. It was a long, mournful, almost guttural howl, imbued with a profound loneliness and an immense, untamed power. It seemed to vibrate through the very rock beneath us, a sound that bypassed the ears and settled deep in the bones. The Sherpas in our party murmured prayers, their faces tight with unease. Finch was practically vibrating with excitement, convinced it was the call of the Yeti. Hansen made a notation in a small, reinforced datapad, her expression still inscrutable. I felt a primal shiver trace its way down my spine. The sound was undeniably real, undeniably other. My own recording equipment, designed for more conventional surveillance, struggled to capture its full spectrum. but I managed to get a partial recording. The agency, I knew, had far more sophisticated acoustic sensors. If they were indeed operating in this region, they would undoubtedly have registered such a phenomenon. The footprints, the impossible disappearance, the unearthly howl. The evidence was mounting, painting a picture of a creature perfectly adapted to this brutal environment, elusive, powerful, and utterly mysterious. My initial skepticism was rapidly being eroded by the stark, undeniable reality of the Himalayas. And the more real the Yeti became, the more certain I was that the agency's interest was anything but academic. The game was afoot, on the highest, most dangerous stage on Earth. The Himalayas are a fickle beast, capable of shifting from breathtaking beauty to murderous fury in the span of heartbeats. We learned this lesson with brutal efficiency on our 5th day above base camp. The morning had dawned deceptively clear, the sun glinting off the vast, icy expanse. But by mid-afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised, malevolent purple, and the wind, always a persistent companion, had risen to a shrieking, ice-laden gale. A blizzard descended upon us with terrifying speed, a whiteout that reduced visibility to near zero. Snow, driven horizontally by the wind, stung any exposed skin like needles. The temperature plummeted, and the world dissolved into a maelstrom of swirling white and deafening noise. Tenzin, his voice barely audible above the storm's roar, yelled for us to find shelter, his experience guiding us towards a cluster of massive boulders that offered a modicum of protection from the wind's main onslaught. We were trapped. For 2 days and nights, the blizzard raged, a relentless assault that tested our endurance and frayed our nerves. The cramped, frigid conditions inside our high-altitude tents were a breeding ground for tension. Rations were dwindling faster than anticipated, and the constant thrumming roar of the wind was a psychological torment. The effects of altitude sickness became more pronounced. One of the doctoral students, a young man named Davis, was clearly struggling, his breathing shallow, his complexion a sickly gray. Dr. Hansen administered what aid she could, her movements efficient and calm, but even her professional demeanor couldn't entirely mask the growing concern. It was during a brief lull on the second night, when the wind momentarily dropped to a mournful howl, that I saw it. I had stepped out of my tent for a moment, needing to escape the suffocating proximity of my tentmate Gregor, whose grumbling had become incessant. The moon, a pale ghost behind the thinning clouds, cast an eerie, diffused light across the snow-blasted landscape. And there, moving with an impossible, almost fluid grace against the backdrop of the churning snow and ice, was a figure. It was massive, far larger than any human, its silhouette hunched and powerful, covered in what appeared to be thick, dark fur that blended almost perfectly with the shadowed rocks. It moved with a speed and agility that defied the treacherous terrain and the biting wind, a phantom gliding through the storm. It was there for only a handful of heartbeats, a fleeting glimpse in the ethereal moonlight, before it vanished behind a snowdrift, leaving no trace. My breath hitched, the cold air burning my lungs. I wasn't sure what I'd seen. A trick of the light? A hallucination brought on by altitude and exhaustion? But the image was seared into my mind. The sheer scale of it, the effortless power. I fumbled for my thermal imaging monocular, a piece of kit I'd acquired before leaving Kathmandu, but by the time I raised it, there was nothing but the swirling snow. I didn't mention it to the others immediately. In the strained, anxious atmosphere, reporting such a sighting might be dismissed as delusion, or worse, cause further panic. But the image stayed with me, a chilling confirmation that we were not alone in this frozen wasteland. When the blizzard finally broke on the 3rd morning, it left behind a world transformed, pristine, silent, and incredibly dangerous. Fresh snow lay thick and unstable on every slope, the risk of avalanches now critically high. Davis's condition had worsened, and Finch, despite his own visible fatigue, made the difficult decision to send him and one other student back down to a lower altitude with a couple of Sherpas. The expedition was shrinking, its resources strained. The phantom I'd seen in the storm, coupled with the previous evidence, solidified a growing conviction within me. The Yeti, or whatever it was, wasn't just a legend. It was real, a master of its brutal domain, capable of navigating conditions that would kill any ordinary creature. And if it was real, then the agency's interest, their potential presence, became an even more ominous consideration. Were they merely observing, or were they too hunting this elusive phantom of the snows? For reasons I could only guess at with a growing sense of dread. The stakes of this frozen game had just been raised significantly. The blizzard had reshaped the landscape, carving new drifts and exposing hidden features. With Davies and one student heading down, our remaining party felt significantly smaller. The vastness of the Himalayas even more pronounced. Finch, though clearly disappointed by the setback, remained stubbornly optimistic, his gaze fixed on the higher peaks where he believed our quarry resided. Dr. Hansen's composure remained intact, though I noticed her paying closer attention to the readings on her various environmental sensors, her brow furrowed in concentration more often. Gregor just grumbled about lost time. Tenzin, his knowledge of these treacherous mountains unparalleled, suggested a new route, one that might bypass some of the more avalanche-prone slopes exposed by the recent snowfall. It led us into a narrow, winding valley we hadn't previously explored, a place of stark, frozen beauty, where ancient glaciers had carved deep gouges into the rock. It was here, tucked away at the base of a towering icefall that glittered like a wall of diamonds in the cold sunlight, that we found it, the entrance to a vast ice cave. It wasn't a mere crevasse, but a proper cavern, its maw a dark, gaping hole in the crystalline blue ice, exhaling a breath of frigid air that was noticeably colder than the already biting wind. A hushed excitement fell over our small group. Caves, especially in such remote and inhospitable regions, were often natural shelters for wildlife. Finch was almost trembling with anticipation. "This could be it," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "A den, perhaps. A seasonal refuge." Tenzin, however, looked uneasy. He murmured something in Sherpa to his companions, his gaze fixed on the dark entrance, with a mixture of apprehension and respect. "Mete place," he translated for us, his tone somber. "Bad luck to disturb." Despite Tenzin's warning, Finch was determined to investigate. I found myself agreeing, though for different reasons. If the Yeti was real, a place like this would be a prime candidate for a lair. And if the agency was operating in this area, they too would be drawn to such a significant geological feature. Equipped with headlamps and ice axes, Finch, Hansen, Gregor and I, along with Tenzin, who reluctantly agreed to accompany us more to ensure our safety than out of enthusiasm, ventured into the icy darkness. The beam of my headlamp cut through the gloom, revealing a breathtaking, otherworldly interior. The walls were sculpted ice, shimmering with trapped air bubbles and intricate frost patterns, like a cathedral carved by an ancient, frozen god. The air was still, heavy, and carried a faint musky odor I couldn't quite place, an animal scent, but not one I recognized. Deeper inside, the cave branched into smaller tunnels. We followed the largest, our footsteps crunching on the icy floor, and then we started finding signs. First, a scattering of large bones, picked clean, some of them clearly belonging to tar or blue sheep, the native ungulates of the region. But the way they were broken, snapped cleanly, as if by immense force, was unusual. Then, Gregor, who was scouting ahead, called out, his voice tight. We hurried to join him. On a relatively flat section of the cave floor, there were more of those massive, five-toed footprints, perfectly preserved in a layer of frozen mud. But here, alongside them, were something else. Clumps of coarse, dark brownish fur, snagged on jagged spurs of ice. Finch carefully collected a few strands, his hands shaking. "The color matches some of the older eyewitness accounts," he breathed, his eyes wide. Hansen, ever the scientist, produced a sterile collection bag and tweezers, meticulously gathering samples. As we moved further, the musky odor intensified, and then we heard it, a low, guttural sound, like something large breathing heavily, or perhaps a soft growl, echoing from the deeper recesses of the cave system. It was accompanied by a faint, rhythmic scraping noise. Tame. We froze, headlamps sweeping the darkness ahead. The sound stopped. An oppressive silence descended, broken only by the drip of melting ice and our own ragged breaths. My hand instinctively went to the emergency flare I carried, a more potent deterrent than my Zippo in these enclosed spaces. The Yeti, or whatever shared its name, was close, perhaps very close. The echoes in the ice cave were no longer just sounds. They were a chilling confirmation of a powerful, unseen presence. And my suspicion that the agency might have more than a passing interest in such a creature, and its potential lair, grew stronger with every frigid breath I took. This cave might hold more secrets than just those of a mythical beast. The silence in the ice cave stretched, taut and heavy, after the guttural sounds and scraping noises ceased. Every drip of meltwater, every shuffle of our own feet on the icy floor, seemed amplified 100-fold. Tenzin made a subtle gesture, a silent warning to remain still, his eyes, accustomed to the subtle shifts of the mountain, darting into the impenetrable darkness ahead. Finch, despite his eagerness, seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, his earlier excitement replaced by a tense, focused anticipation. Hansen adjusted her headlamp, her gaze analytical, while Gregor, for once, was utterly silent, his hand resting on the ice axe looped to his belt. My own senses were on high alert. The musky, animal scent was stronger here, almost overpowering, tinged with something else. A faint, metallic tang that reminded me unpleasantly of stale blood. The agency had protocols for encountering unknown biological entities, though most of those protocols involved containment or neutralization, neither of which felt appropriate or even feasible here. My primary goal was observation, evidence, and survival. After what felt like an eternity, Finch, unable to contain his curiosity any longer, made a move to advance. I put a hand on his arm, shaking my head slightly. Rushing in was foolish. We needed to be cautious, to assess. It was then that the scraping sound resumed, closer this time, accompanied by a soft, almost sighing exhalation, like a massive bellows. And from the darkness of a side tunnel, a shadow detached itself, resolving into a form that stole the breath from my lungs. It was the Yeti. Ata. No fleeting glimpse in a blizzard this time. No indistinct shape. Even in the imperfect shifting beams of our headlamps, its presence was overwhelming. It stood well over 8 feet tall, its frame immensely powerful, shoulders broad and hunched. Its body was covered in thick, shaggy fur, not white as some legends suggested, but a deep, earthy brown, matted in places with what looked like dried mud or ice. Its face was more ape-like than human, with a flattened nose, a heavy brow ridge, and small, deeply set eyes that seemed to absorb the light, reflecting very little. They were not the eyes of a mindless beast. There was an intelligence there, a wary, ancient wisdom. It hadn't seen us yet, or if it had, it gave no immediate sign. It was dragging something, the source of the scraping sound, which I now saw was the carcass of a tar, its neck clearly broken. The creature moved with a surprising, almost silent grace for its size, its massive, 5-toed feet finding purchase on the slick ice with an uncanny sureness. Finch let out a choked gasp, fumbling for his camera. The sudden sound, small as it was, cut through the silence. The Yeti froze. Its great head swiveled towards us, its small eyes, glinting now in our combined headlamp beams, fixing on our group. For a timeless moment, we were locked in a silent tableau, a group of stunned, fragile humans, and this immense, mythical being disturbed in its icy sanctum. There was no immediate aggression in its posture, more a profound, almost weary surprise, mixed with an undeniable undercurrent of immense, coiled power. Then, things happened quickly. Finch, recovering, raised his camera, the flash firing with an almost violent intensity in the confined space. The Yeti recoiled, letting out a deafening, guttural roar that vibrated through the ice walls, a sound of pure, untamed fury and perhaps pain from the sudden, blinding light. It dropped the tar carcass and took a half step towards us, its massive arms, ending in hands that looked capable of crushing rock, tensing. Instinct took over. "Back!" I yelled, shoving Finch and Hansen behind me, simultaneously yanking the emergency flare from my belt and striking it against its igniter. The flare erupted with a blinding crimson hiss, flooding the ice cave with an intense, otherworldly light and acrid smoke. The Yeti, already disoriented by the camera flash, let out another roar, this one tinged with what sounded like fear or confusion. It shielded its eyes with one massive forearm and stumbled back, away from the intense light and chemical smell of the flare. It was a creature of darkness and shadow, its senses clearly overwhelmed. It didn't attack. Instead, with a speed that was terrifying in such a massive creature, it turned and lumbered deeper into the branching tunnels of the ice cave, its dark form quickly swallowed by the shadows beyond the flare's reach. Its retreating roar echoed back to us, a sound of frustrated power. We were left standing there, hearts pounding, the acrid smoke of the flare stinging our nostrils. The image of the creature, real, undeniable and terrifyingly powerful, burned into our retinas. We had found the Yeti. And it had found us. The acrid smoke of the flare slowly dissipated, leaving behind the heavy silence of the ice cave and the lingering primal scent of the Yeti. My ears rang from its deafening roars. Finch was almost catatonic with a mixture of terror and scientific ecstasy, muttering about irrefutable proof and paradigm shifts. Hansen was checking her equipment, her face pale but her hands surprisingly steady as she secured the first samples she'd collected. Gregor, for once, looked genuinely shaken, his usual bluster replaced by a wide-eyed stare into the darkness where the creature had vanished. Tenzin simply murmured a quiet prayer, his gaze troubled. The immediate aftermath of the encounter was chaotic. Finch wanted to pursue, to get better footage, more samples. "We can't let it get away," he insisted, his voice high-pitched. "This is the discovery of a lifetime. It's also a creature that could tear us limb from limb without breaking a sweat, Professor," I countered, my voice tight. "And this is its home. We're the intruders. Pushing it further is suicide." My priority was to get us out of the cave safely. The Yeti was clearly agitated, and its knowledge of these ice tunnels far surpassed ours. The flare had bought us time, but its effects wouldn't last forever. It was during this tense debate, amidst the flickering shadows of our headlamps, that Dr. Hansen made a quiet, almost casual pronouncement. "The atmospheric pressure within the deeper cave system is fluctuating erratically," she said, tapping at her reinforced datapad. "And my seismic sensors are picking up minor, but increasing, tremors originating from the icefall directly above us." A new, colder dread settled over me, eclipsing even the recent terror of the Yeti. An unstable icefall above a vast ice cave system was a recipe for disaster. The Yeti's roars, the vibrations from its powerful movements, or even just the natural stresses within the glacier, could be enough to trigger a collapse. "We need to leave," Tenzin stated flatly, his earlier reluctance to enter now replaced by an urgent authority. "Now. This place is not safe." Finch, however, was lost in his obsession. "Nonsense. A little seismic activity is normal in these regions. We're on the cusp of—" "Professor," Hansen interrupted, her voice losing its usual detached calm and gaining a sharp edge I hadn't heard before, "the readings are not normal. They are indicative of imminent structural instability. We have minutes, perhaps an hour at most, before a significant collapse event is highly probable." Her certainty, backed by the data she displayed on her screen, rapidly changing graphs and alarming red indicators, finally seemed to penetrate Finch's fervor. Fear, stark and primal, flickered in his eyes, but as we began a hasty retreat towards the cave entrance, Gregor suddenly voiced an objection that chilled me more than Hansen's warning. "Hold on," he said, his gaze shifting between Hansen and me. "That flare, Ryder, you had that ready pretty quick." And you, Doctor, with your fancy sensors, you too seem awfully prepared for unexpected encounters." His eyes narrowed. "What aren't you telling us, Finch? Is this more than just some innocent scientific jaunt?" The accusation hung heavy in the frigid air. Hansen met his gaze coolly, but I saw a flicker of something. Calculation? Her eyes. Finch stammered a denial, but the seed of distrust had been sown. The internal cohesion of our already stressed group was fracturing at the worst possible moment. "We can discuss theories later," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "Right now, we move, or we get buried alive. Tenzin, lead the way, fast." The retreat was a nightmare. The tremors were becoming more frequent. Small showers of ice and snow falling from the cave roof. The musky scent of the YETI'S seemed to cling to us, a reminder of the other danger that still lurked in the darkness. And now, added to the external threats, was a corrosive internal suspicion. Gregor kept casting dark looks my way, and Finch seemed torn between his scientific ambitions and a dawning fear that he was caught in something far more complex than he'd bargained for. Hansen remained an enigma. Her warning had been timely, perhaps life-saving. But Gregor's accusation resonated with my own underlying suspicions about her. Was her presence here truly just as a medic and biologist? Or was she, like me, playing a deeper game, her objectives aligned with an organization that thrived in the shadows? The ice cave, once a place of breathtaking discovery, had become a trap, its beauty now menacing. And the fracture point wasn't just in the ice above us, it was within our own fragile expedition. The rumbling started subtly, a low thrumming vibration felt more through the soles of our boots than heard, but it rapidly intensified. Tenzin, his face a mask of grim urgency, urged us faster, his movements economical and swift despite the treacherous, uneven ice floor. The beams of our headlamps danced frantically, painting grotesque, elongated shadows on the shimmering ice walls as we stumbled and scrambled towards the distant promise of daylight at the cave entrance. "Faster!" Hansen's voice was sharp, cutting through the growing cacophony of groaning ice and falling debris. "The main icefall is destabilizing." Her words were punctuated by a deafening crack from above, like a cannon shot, followed by a shower of ice shards, some as large as footballs, crashing down around us. One struck Gregor on the shoulder with a sickening thud, and he cried out, staggering, though he managed to stay on his feet. The internal suspicions were momentarily forgotten, eclipsed by the raw, immediate terror of being entombed. Finch, his face ashen, was struggling to keep up, his earlier scientific fervor replaced by a desperate, gasping fight for survival. I grabbed his arm, half pulling, half dragging him forward. "Move, Professor, don't think. Just move!" The ice cave had become a death trap. The air was thick with ice dust, making breathing difficult, and the constant tremors disoriented us, threatening to send us sprawling. The musky scent of the YETI was still present, a chilling reminder that even if we survived the collapsing cave, other dangers lurked. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature itself might be on the move, disturbed by the seismic upheaval of its domain. Then, with a sound like the world tearing itself apart, a massive section of the cave roof directly ahead of us, between our group and the entrance, groaned and then collapsed with terrifying finality. A wall of ice and snow thundered down, completely blocking our primary escape route, plunging us into a deeper, more profound darkness as our headlamps struggled to penetrate the swirling cloud of ice particles. Panic, raw and unbridled, threatened to overwhelm us. Finch let out a strangled cry. Gregor cursed, clutching his injured shoulder. "Tenzin!" I yelled, my voice hoarse above the din. "Is there another way? A side tunnel?" For a moment, there was only the roar of settling ice and our own ragged breathing. Then, Tenzin's voice, remarkably calm amidst the chaos, cut through. "This way. Small passage maybe. Follow." He led us towards a narrow fissure in the ice wall I hadn't noticed before, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. It was a desperate gamble. The passage could lead nowhere, or into an even more unstable section of the cave. But it was our only hope. One by one, we squeezed into the tight, claustrophobic passage. Ice pressed in on all sides, its frigid touch seeping through our insulated clothing. The tremors continued, and the sound of the main cave collapsing behind us was a terrifying, ongoing roar. Gregor, his shoulder clearly causing him immense pain, struggled, but Hansen and I managed to help him through. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes forcing us to crawl. The air was stale, the darkness absolute beyond the reach of our failing headlamps. My fear of enclosed spaces, a constant, unwelcome companion, clawed at me, but the greater fear of being buried alive spurred me on. After what felt like an eternity of suffocating darkness and desperate scrambling, Tenzin, who was in the lead, let out a grunt. Light! A faint, pale luminescence appeared ahead. With renewed energy, we pushed forward, emerging one by one, gasping and covered in ice dust, from a small, almost hidden opening on a lower, more sheltered ledge of the mountainside. We were out. Battered, bruised, and terrified, but alive. Below us, we could see the devastation. The entire area around the main entrance to the ice cave had vanished under a colossal avalanche of ice and snow from the collapsed icefall. Had we been a few minutes slower, we would have been instantly obliterated. As we stood there, catching our breath, looking back at the destruction, a movement on a high ridge opposite us caught my eye. Silhouetted against the bruised pre-dawn sky, a massive, dark figure stood watching us. The Yeti. It made no move to approach, no threatening gesture. It simply stood there, a silent, enigmatic observer of the chaos, before melting back into the shadows of the rocks. Had its earlier roars, its agitation, contributed to the collapse? Or was it merely another survivor, witnessing the destructive power of its frozen realm? I didn't know. But its presence was a final, chilling punctuation mark on our narrow escape. We had survived the mountain's fury, but the mystery of its most elusive inhabitant and the shadowy organization that sought it remained. The descent from the high camp was a grim, silent affair. The near-total collapse of the ice cave system and our harrowing escape had shattered any remaining illusions of a triumphant scientific discovery. Finch was a broken man, his dreams of irrefutable proof buried under tons of ice and snow. The physical evidence we'd gathered, the fur samples meticulously collected by Hansen, the casts of footprints, my own partial recordings and fleeting thermal images, felt meager compared to the raw, terrifying reality of our encounter. Gregor, his shoulder crudely bandaged, nursed his injury and his suspicions in sullen silence. Tenzin and the remaining Sherpas moved with their usual quiet efficiency, their faces betraying little, though I sensed a profound relief beneath their stoicism. Dr. Hansen remained an enigma. Throughout the ordeal, her composure had been remarkable, her actions efficient and, at times, undeniably life-saving. Yet, Gregor's accusations about her preparedness, coupled with my own persistent unease about her background, lingered. Had her timely warnings about the cave's instability been purely scientific observation, or had she possessed prior knowledge, perhaps even an objective to ensure the cave, and whatever secrets it held beyond the Yeti, remained inaccessible? The agency worked in layers of deception. She could easily be an unwitting pawn, a willing operative, or something else entirely. For now, I had no proof, only more questions. We reached Lukla, the gateway town with its infamous airstrip, battered and weary, but alive. The news of our expedition's dramatic end, filtered through Finch's somewhat incoherent and grief-stricken account, would likely be a mix of perceived failure and sensational, unconfirmed Yeti sightings. The mainstream scientific community would probably dismiss it, as they always had. But I knew what I had seen. The Yeti was real. Not a myth, not a misidentified bear, but a creature of immense power and surprising intelligence, perfectly adapted to one of the harshest environments on Earth. My fleeting images and recordings, though imperfect, were more than I'd hoped for. They were pieces of a puzzle, not just about the Yeti, but about the agency's far-reaching interests. Before we parted ways in Kathmandu, Hansen approached me. "Mr. Ryder, she said, her expression carefully neutral. "Despite the unfortunate outcome, your contributions were significant. The samples we did manage to retrieve will be analyzed. Perhaps something conclusive will emerge." "Perhaps," I replied, meeting her gaze. "Or perhaps some mysteries are best left undisturbed, Doctor." Her lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile. "Some would say that. Others believe all knowledge is worth pursuing, regardless of the cost." It felt less like a statement, and more like a carefully veiled credo. Back in the relative chaos of civilization, the silence of the high Himalayas haunted me. The image of that massive, dark figure watching us from the ridge, a silent, enigmatic guardian of its frozen realm, was seared into my memory. It hadn't displayed overt malice, only a profound desire to be left alone, a territorial imperative. Our intrusion had nearly cost us our lives, not from the creature itself, but from the raw, untamed power of its environment, perhaps even triggered by its distress. The legacy of the snowman, for me, wasn't just about proving or disproving a legend. It was about understanding the limits of human ambition, the fragility of our existence in the face of true wilderness, and the uncomfortable truth that some creatures, some places, are best left to their own ancient silence. The agency, however, rarely respected such boundaries. My encounter with the Yeti, the near-fatal expedition, and Dr. Hansen's cryptic presence had only deepened my conviction that their tendrils were everywhere, their motives inscrutable and often dangerous. The thin air of the Himalayas had cleared my head in some ways, but it had also revealed a landscape of even greater, more complex conspiracies. The hunt would continue, not just for cryptids, but for the truth behind the organization that seemed to pull strings from the deepest shadows to the highest peaks on Earth. And the image of those intelligent, wary eyes in the ice cave would serve as a constant reminder of the profound mysteries that still lay hidden,